I want to just in a moment show you some suggestions on how to annotate spreadsheet files. Annotate means adding notes or explanations. So I'll show you that in just a moment. Has anybody looked at the quiz that's online? Just one person so far?
I did it last night around like midnight. It actually wasn't hard at all.
Good. I'm glad you found it easy. There's, I think, 12 or so questions, maybe 13. And I haven't written the midterm yet, so I don't know how long it is compared to the midterm that you're going to get. But the quiz is just mainly an opportunity for you to see whether you understand some concepts well enough to answer these kinds of questions. So that quiz doesn't have any concept questions, and your first exam will. But that online quiz, which has no impact on your grade, it does have some calculation type problems that are very similar to what you can expect on the midterm exam. So that's available to you or not, as you prefer, and it's open so that you could repeat it as many times as you like. Homework 4 is going to be due next Wednesday, and that's available now on Blackboard. Let me show you the solution to the first problem, just because I think maybe it's an opportunity to illustrate what I mean by annotation. When you have a spreadsheet solution, it's not necessary, but I think it is value added if you put the problem statement on the worksheet that the problem is solved. And so you can do that just by pushing the print screen button on your keyboard when you've got the PDF up. But it's not absolutely required. I do it just because it makes it easier to understand solution if you have the answer up on the screen. You'll notice down here at the bottom, I've got each problem on a different tab. So P1 is the first problem, P2 is the second problem, and so on. So I think what you ought to do is pay some attention to making the spreadsheet look as clear and neat as possible. And so that might include bolding column headers, centering numbers when it's appropriate to do so, formatting the text so that it's got commas and is formatted as currency. Those are all ways that I think it can make the spreadsheet look a little bit more clear. I think it's good to add notes that explains what you're doing and that you understand how to solve it. And so this is just a little note that I've put in here, that this is what we're trying to find. This is the objective in the goal seek for the total to be equals 0. And then down here at the bottom, I've got the answer in bold, italics, and it's highlighted in yellow, just to make the answer really easy to find. Now, the general principle that I've told the graders is it's not their job to go hunting for the solution in your homework assignment. It's your job to make it clear to them and to communicate the answer to the solution. So I've got 2 homework graders who are working in this course, and each week they're going to be grading between 30 and 35 assignments each. So, it's a lot, and they don't have time to go hunting when you've got 9 problems. So things like this, making it really easy to find the answer and adding explanatory notes about what you did, adding clear column titles and formatting it so that it's clear, all of that can really help the grader to give you all the partial credit, if you've made a mistake, that you're entitled to. So any questions about formatting homework assignments or annotation in general?
I have a question about the exam. Will that be, will you need to bring a hard copy of the book, or will you give us snippets of the charts and tables we need?
So on the exam, I'll give you a copy of the equation page and any factor tables that you need. So you don't need to bring the textbook for the exam. But you should bring your computer for the exam, because there will be at least one computer-based problem that you'll be expected to solve by Excel. Other questions?
You wanted us to do number 1 in Excel.
Well, I did number 1 in Excel. You don't necessarily have to. I think it's a lot simpler if you do.
Okay, so I was just wondering if you would allow us to, that's how I was thinking to do it too.
Yeah, on homework assignments, if it doesn't specifically say that you must do it by Excel, then you can choose. Sometimes I'll say do it by hand. Sometimes I'll say do it on Excel. But then if it, like this one, doesn't say one way or the other, then that means it's up to you.
This is for down the road, but when we get to our final exams and stuff, are they just going to be almost all
No, I'd say that there'll be some hand calculations and some Excel for
Okay.
the exams.
I was just wondering, so let's say like problem 3, I mean, it says you use present worth analysis, but can we do it on Excel? Like, it doesn't say like,
Yeah, if it doesn't say, then you can choose.
'cause it says like present worth analysis, but it doesn't say like, do it on hand specifically, not Excel.
Yeah, so if it doesn't say, then you can choose.
Okay.
All right. So remember that last time what we talked about was the least common multiple method of making cash flow diagrams the same length. Because oftentimes when we're comparing alternatives, they'll have a different useful life or a different time horizon that they apply to. And so what LCM, least common multiple, did was repeated them until they both terminated in the same number of years. So we looked at this cash flow diagram where we had to repeat the short cash flow diagram with 3 cycles and the longer of the 2 with 2 cycles that both terminated with 18 years. And then when the same study period is applicable to both options, then we can find the present worth and apply the decision criteria. Does anybody recall what is the decision criteria that we apply for present worth analysis? What's that?
The lowest present worth, or
Yeah.
the highest present worth.
Very close.
Basically, like, if they're if they're mutually exclusive, you wanna pick the one that has the highest value.
That's right, the highest non-negative value. So occasionally we'll have options that have both negative values for both of them, and sometimes it's a piece of equipment that we have to buy regardless of the fact that it's a cost-only alternative. But if it's not a cost-only alternative, then we could reject both options and choose do nothing. But the decision criteria is just some sort of a standard you apply to know which alternative to choose. So you discount the cash flow diagrams to the present at the MAR. This is another term that was used last time. Does anybody remember what that abbreviation stands for?
Minimum acceptable rate of return.
Good. Yeah, minimum acceptable rate of return, sometimes also called minimum attractive rate of return. Oftentimes it's the same as your borrowing cost. In other cases, it's just a policy decision that's made by the management of a company on what's the minimum profit rate they want to see for a project in order to move forward with executing it. So there will be some interest rate that's specified. You discount everything to the present, and then you pick the larger of the 2 positive rates of present worth. Okay, so here's that same cash flow diagram. 2 of them. One option is too short, one option is too long. The first technique I taught you was LCM. There are 2 other ways that we can make these cash flow diagrams have the same length. And if one of them is too short and one of them is too long, one of the approaches is contract services. And what contract services does is it takes the one that's too short and makes it longer. So option A in this previous illustration only lasted through 6 years. So contract services basically says, let's rent the equipment or lease it or take out a contract. Let's find some alternate way on a year-by-year basis to have a substitute piece of equipment available so that we can lengthen the shorter option and make it last the same study period as the longer of the 2 options. So option B already went through 9 years. Option A used to be 6. And what this cash flow diagram is showing is if you spend $4,000 a year to take out a contract and have the equipment available on a lease basis, then you could continue to have the revenue each year that's associated with operating that equipment. So now the 2 cash flow diagrams have the same 9-year duration. So a similar item is being leased and you're extending the short cash flow diagram. So remember, LCM was repeat them until they terminated in the same year. Contract services is take the short option and make it longer. So they'll have the same useful life if you extend the shorter of the two cash flow diagrams. All right, so we're going to practice this and also using the table lookup method with today's in-class exercise. Okay, so this is that cash flow diagram I was just showing you. And in contract services, what you're going to do is in years 7, 8, and 9, you've got an annual series of costs that all of this needs to be taken to the present in order to find out which option has the highest present worth. And you'll see that the 4% table is provided, so discount everything at 4% per year. If you want to check your answer, the solution's up on the screen. If you're still working, that's great. We have time. Continue, but it is up there. Okay, so let's talk about option A. Hopefully by now it's becoming second nature to look at a cash flow diagram and quickly understand like what the strategy needs to be in order to find the present value. So when you look at that cash flow diagram, you'll notice that standalone annual series of outflows that goes 7, 8, and 9. So if you do find P given A, that takes it to a lump sum here in year 6. And then to move it from year 6 to 0, you'll need to do find P given F. So that's what this, first of all, solution kind of structure says, is there's the initial 11,500 outflow that's already at the present. Then you're going to do find P given A of the inflow of $5,000 per year. So that's N equals 9, and that'll take it all the way to times 0 in a single step. But then this annual series of 4,000, we need to do a find P given A, and then you multiply it by the factor for find P given F. And so it's a two-step jump to get it from an annual series to year 0. So in the end, you should have 16,900 once you've rounded off for the 4 digits of precision that we've got in the P/F factor. And then option B is a little bit simpler because it doesn't have that two-step annual series. For option B, we can find out that the present worth of that alternative is $14,285. So we should choose option A since it has the higher positive present worth. So we started off not able to compare them. Ordinarily, option A and option B couldn't be compared because they have different useful lives. But in this case, we decided to lengthen the useful life of option A by renting similar equipment for 4 consecutive years following the natural end of the useful life of that equipment. So any questions about contract services? You do have a couple of homework problems that are related to contract services. It even says that phrase just so you know which method to apply. Problem 5 is contract services. Problem 6 is contract services. So I haven't given you a cash flow diagram like I did in this in-class exercise. My suggestion is for you to make your own cash flow diagram. So translate what's written here in English into a cash flow diagram, and then you can apply contract services to lengthen the shorter of the two alternatives.
Would you prefer a cash flow diagram?
I think cash flow diagrams are really useful. It doesn't help me, it helps you.
All right.
So if you find it helpful, and I think most of you will, you know, it'll help you avoid mistakes if you take the time to sketch out a cash flow diagram. So I think it's a good habit, but it's not a matter of insistence on my part. Yeah.
So when it comes to extending option A,
Yeah.
how did they come up with the 4,000 specifically?
you'd probably get some quotes. You know, like in the real world, if you were applying this method, let's say that you had a piece of equipment that had worn out, you'd call, there's a rental agency here in town called Bosley Rentals. You know, you'd call and say, you know, how much is it going to be for this excavator that I need if I'm going to use it for a year at a time? And so you'd look at all of the operating and rental costs and then assume that you still have the same productivity or generating the same revenue. Now, in the homework, you don't have to call and get quotes. It's just, it tells you how much it would cost to lease the equipment rather than purchase it.
Okay, so it's not like figuring out a ratio in comparison to A to B.
No, here in the problem statement, it tells you to rent, for example, to rent a shredder would have an overall cost of $13.50 per year. So I tell you straight out. Or in the case of some chainsaws, to rent a Husqvarna saw costs $330 each per year. So it's just defined in the problem statement.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. So remember, now you've had two techniques: LCM, least common multiples. Then we had contract services, which made the short cash flow diagram longer. Early termination is a technique that takes the long cash flow diagram and makes it shorter. So instead of renting some equipment to extend the short option, in the case of early termination, what you're doing is you're saying, well, option B would normally last for 9 years, but what I'm going to do instead of keeping it for the full 9 years is I'll just sell it after 6 years, and then I'll forego a certain amount of revenue for having operated it. So in the case of early termination, what they'll normally tell you in the problem statement is how much you can sell the equipment for if you sell it after 1 year, if you sell it after 2 years and 3 years. So the value of the equipment each year that you've owned it is going to decrease. That's a concept called depreciation, which we'll talk more about later in the semester. But in simplistic terms, just as equipment becomes more worn out and has less of a remaining useful life, the market value of the equipment is lower. And so what you need to do is replace the cash flows that would be coming in for operating the equipment in years 7, 8, and 9 with a single lump sum value that represents the salvage value of the equipment in that year. Okay, so in the in-class exercise, I'm telling you in this table how much resale value option B has if you sell it in a certain year. So the objective here is to make it so they both have the same duration. 6 years for option A, 6 years for option B. So what you're going to do is just cross out the revenue in year 7, 8, and 9 because you've sold the equipment at the end of 6 years. And instead of that inflow over time, you're going to take a single lump sum amount representing the resale value. All right, so let me pause and let you solve the second problem. Make note that on the second problem, the applicable interest rate is 10%. So we're using a different cash flow table. Don't use the 4% table. Use the 10% table for the second problem on the in-class exercise.
Bad place for it. You're trying to find the future value.
Okay, the solution is up on the screen if you want to double check what you wrote compared to my calculations. Now let's talk about the thoroughness of what you write when you're doing calculations, because it's possible, I'm not saying it's likely, I'm just saying it's possible that you might make a mistake this semester, even during an exam. And when you do, you'll get more partial credit on the exam if you kind of show what your thinking was and you illustrate that you understood certain things. So if all you did was wrote present worth of A is and the final answer, and it's wrong, then you're not going to get any partial credit whatsoever, because you're not kind of leaving the breadcrumbs to illustrate that you understood what sort of problem this was. But you'll notice that what I start off in saying is I'm writing kind of the solution structure by starting off with P/A, the interest rate, n equals 6. I don't jump straight to the factor itself. And I think it's a good idea to take the time, even though it's taking you a few moments more to write it out step by step. If you write these intermediate steps and illustrate that you knew that it's a find present given an annual series, that you've used the correct interest rate, that you understand the correct number of periods and so on, if you take the time to write those intermediate steps, number one, it'll help you avoid mistakes. And number two, when you do make mistakes, it'll just demonstrate a greater level of understanding. So it's for your own benefit. You know, paper is cheap, pencils are cheap, so there's no reason to cram your solution into a tiny little piece, a tiny little space of paper. Spread it out, let it breathe, be as detailed and thorough as you need to be to really communicate well what's happening in the solution. So here what we did as far as early termination is we terminated option B 3 years early, canceling out the revenue that we would have seen in years 7, 8, and 9, substituting it with the early sale of the equipment in year 6. So this table told us if we had terminated after 5 years, then the equipment would be worth $7,200. If we terminated after 4 years, it'd be worth $9,000, and so on. So any questions about this problem? So on the homework, you have an early termination problem. This IBM server versus Dell server, they don't have the same useful life. And so I tell you to use early termination because you understand how much the IBM equipment is worth if you sell it back to the company. So the problem statement tells you what is given as a table in the in-class exercise. So instead of giving you a table, it just explains the resale value. In class on Wednesday, I suggested that you exchange phone numbers with the people that you've been collaborating with here in class. I think it's a good idea if you've got a study partner, somebody you can check answers with. Let's review the syllabus briefly just to review what is considered acceptable collaboration and what's unacceptable collaboration. So it's okay, for example, to talk about the homework problems with other people. Like if you've got problem 6 open and you don't know how to start, you maybe could talk to your study buddy and they'd say, well, did you notice at the bottom it said contract services? Oh, I missed that. So sometimes it's helpful to bounce ideas off of someone else, and that's acceptable as far as I'm concerned, to talk about the homework problem. It's okay to check your final answer with somebody else. Now, what's not okay is to show someone every step of your solution. Like if you take a picture of your homework and you text it to someone, and they're most likely just going to copy it. And you've effectively robbed them of the opportunity to go through that strengthening exercise that they'll need in order to be ready for the exam. So don't show someone or all of the steps, or don't give them your homework assignment to copy, because when inappropriate collaboration is identified, the penalty is larger than if you just not submitted the homework at all, regardless of whether you're the person who's providing the copying material or the person who did the copying. Both people will receive a penalty. But I mean, more importantly is just everyone works at a different speed, so I really do want you to collaborate and help each other on the assignments and help each other learn, but don't steal the learning opportunity from someone else by showing them every step of what you did. I think you also need to be careful about group working problems at the same time, because if you're sitting next to someone else and you're both working on the same problem at the same time, most likely whoever is going through that problem faster is just going to be mimicked by the slower of the two. And then you won't have gone through that kind of discovery and strengthening process that you need. So do, by all means, collaborate, but keep it in the realm of acceptable collaboration behavior. Any questions about that? Okay, so if we just revisit the announcements, keep in mind that the next homework assignment you've got is due on Wednesday of next week, and that optional quiz is available now for you to go through and solve on Blackboard. I'll see you Monday.